Hello. So I decided to do something new. If you're not interested in it, that's cool. If you are, you can join me. I'm just kind of going through this for myself. And I thought that I would do a video because I have no idea what all is going to come out of it or with it. And so I just thought, I'll do a video as I go. So I have not read my book, Breaking Out of Darkness. I wrote this book. I don't even remember when I wrote it. Let me see what the copyright date is. So I wrote this in 2022. Wow. So like 3 years ago, I wrote this. Does it give me the month? No, it doesn't give me the month. So I wrote it in 2022. Don't remember what month it was. And I published it. And it's my testimony of being set free from demonic torment. And I have not picked it back up since then. Except of a couple weeks ago. I got it out. I didn't even have one. I had to order one. I didn't even have one at my house. So I ordered one because I wanted to read it again because I've been giving my testimony a lot lately. Over the past 2 years, I've given my testimony. I don't know how many times, but it's a lot. And it made me start thinking about the book that I wrote with my testimony and what has changed. Not as far as what's changed with my story, because nothing with my story changes, but just as in when I wrote that, what deeper insights has the Lord given me, and what has he spoken to me on some of the things that I wrote about. And I don't know, just to see what all I wrote, because I honestly don't even remember exactly everything that he was bringing out as I was writing it. So I wanted to read it again, but then I wanted to, I think I'm going to do videos with it as I'm reading through, and then I will offer insights as I go. So I'm just going to read it. And then like, as the Lord brings things to my mind or memories or things that maybe he's taken me deeper on, I'm just going to talk about that. One, I'm recording it because I want to have it for me. And most of the things that the Lord teaches me, he teaches me to then in turn teach to others, because I think so many times what one person walks through, somebody else somewhere is walking through something similar. So I'm just going to read. I'm just going to go a little bit today. I don't know each time. It's not a very long book. It's under 200 pages. So I'm just going to read a little bit at a time and then just kind of reflect on it. And I may do the whole book. I may only do a little bit of the book. We'll see. So this is what it looks like. If you're interested in it, you can get it on Amazon. And it's just, again, it's my testimony. So I started with the introduction, and I'm just going to read. My journey includes years of darkness and being trapped in the bottomless pit of despair that I could not see my way out of. As a child, I was sexually abused by my biological father. As a result of that abuse, I spent years of my life in mental and physical torment. My teen years were full of bad choices, chaos, and mental torment that I could not outrun. This led to a marriage at the age of 16 that was full of violence and toxicity, and even ended in divorce, or eventually ended in divorce. In my early 20s, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, PTSD, and dissociative identity disorder. I also had a list of medical diagnoses that seemed to be a mile long. I gave my heart to the Lord when I was 18 years old, but the torment continued for many years until May of 2020, when I was miraculously set free from all the torment and darkness that have followed my entire life. I would love, love, love to offer this book in Spanish. If you guys know of anybody that could do that for me, with me, send them my way. I don't know why that thought came to my mind, but right now it did. I would love to translate this into Spanish and offer it online. I want to take you on my journey to freedom and into stepping into the fullness of God's joy. The best way I know to do that is to start at the beginning. I did my best to avoid creating triggers in this book that would be difficult for trauma survivors to read. I did not go into details about any of the abuse I suffered for the sole purpose of keeping it as trigger-free as possible and manageable for all survivors. So I remember when I was writing this, I wanted to be super careful to not let the enemy keep people away from reading it because they were afraid of it. So I wanted to make it very clear at the beginning that I tried to remain as trigger-free as possible so that people could read it and get hope from it, but not be triggered, because I know the enemy loves to make us afraid of things and drive us away from things that would be helpful. So that's why I put that in there. And I do the same thing when I give my testimony. I never go into detail about the sexual abuse. That part is not important. Like, people don't need details of that. And so I don't go into deep details about any of the ritualistic abuse or anything like that, because people don't need to hear that. I want to encourage you to read my story because you may find it very helpful information that can help set you free in your personal life. What God did for me, he will do for others who seek him. Stepping into the fullness of God's joy can be your journey as well. When we step into his fullness, everything that binds, torments, and hold us back has to break. In the name of Jesus, I would add. The chains have no choice but to fall off our lives and set us free. Everything we have need of is found in him and him alone. We can spend a lifetime seeking healing and never come close to gaining the level of healing he can do in a moment's time. When he heals, it is perfect healing, and when he sets us free, we are free indeed. Note, and I made this clear at the bottom, I remember wanting to make this very clear. When I mention Jim in this book, he is my biological father and the abuser. When I mention my dad, he is technically my stepdad, but I consider him my dad. I just wanted to make that point clear so there's no confusion. Okay, so I'm going to just read probably just 2 small sections is probably what I'll read for this time. And this is my early years. So I wasn't sure, I remember this part too, whenever I was writing this book, I wasn't sure how to actually like lay it out. And that was one of the things I was asking the Lord. I'm like, Lord, how do I lay this out? Like, how do I tell my story in a concise way? Because I would think different things, like, do I start at the present and then go back? But what he led me to was just to start at the beginning. So that's what I did. Like, I made this book like chronological throughout my life and just started at the very beginning. So the first portion is early years. My mom married my biological dad, Jim, at a really young age. It was in our family culture to marry young and start having kids. It was what we did because we had no idea there were any other options in life. She was immediately thrust into a physically violent situation because life had to be his way, on his terms, and any deviation was met with violence and verbal abuse. He was unstable to say the least, and she never knew what would set him off. I've heard a story about their dog getting loose, and he could not get it to come back, so she went outside to help him. When she called for the dog, it came running back to her, and that set Jim into a rage. She paid for trying to help him by getting hit and screamed at. Another time, he got really mad at her and threw a huge flashlight at her head. It barely missed hitting her, hitting the wall instead, so hard that it left a hole. I can only imagine the damage that could have done if it hit her head. There was another time that my mom was hospitalized with a collapsed lung because she had asthma so severely. The doctor told Jim that he had to stop smoking around her, but he refused. He would not even go outside to smoke because it was not what he wanted to do. He was also emotionally neglectful because in his world, he was the center of the universe and others were only in his space to meet his needs. If the people were not meeting his needs, he had no use for them. Even the ones he allowed in his life, he used and abused. There was a coldness about him that followed every move he made. There was a total absence of sympathy or empathy for the feelings of others. He was the center of his universe, and everyone else was expected to revolve around him. I do not think he had the ability to empathize with the feelings of others at all. It was as though they were some needed parts of his character that were missing. My hunch is that when he was being formed in early childhood, he was damaged by the way he was raised, and to an extent that was part of his root issues. He was taught from a very early age that he was the only one who mattered most in his home and that his needs trumped those of anyone else. His parents made sure that he had everything he wanted. He was never held accountable for his actions. He was treated differently than his siblings from the time of his birth. He saw his parents treat him like he was the only one who mattered most to them, and that translated to every area of his life and followed him his entire life. He was bailed out of every issue and mistake that he ever made, and he never had to work for the things he was given. I think another deep-rooted issue was generational in nature. There were things that ran deep in his generational roots that presented in his life as well. I'm not sure why his parents made differences in their children and favored him. It may have been because he was the only son, the youngest, or because he was sick as a baby. Maybe they picked up on the fact that he was different from a very early age and tried to make allowances for those differences. I once heard a story that he was very slow in school and did not learn like the other children. I can only speculate, and I will never know the answers to a lot of questions I have. You know, I used to question a lot, and I used to try to figure out. I think because part of me I think I became a mental health therapist in a lot of ways. One, I wanted to help people. And two, because the human mind fascinates me, and human behavior and what creates patterns, like behavioral patterns. And so for a long time, I really looked at his life and I tried to figure out what made him who he was, or what caused him to go in that direction. Just his life, because he never was the type of abuser that like was kind, or I just never seen kindness in his life. I never seen authentic relationships. It was always one-sided of what he could get from people. Very, very narcissistic would be the word I would put to him. Just his behaviors. And so I often tried to figure out what made him that way. But I come to the conclusion that there are just things that I will never know. And I don't know why he was the way he was. And I don't have to know. I don't need to know. I think there's a lot of factors that go into creating people and the outcomes. And the bottom line is he needed to surrender to God, and he didn't. So this was the world I was born into. I was only a few months old when Jim's parents moved from Ohio to Florida. He wanted to follow them, so he packed up our household and moved with them. All my mom's family were in Indiana, so she moved miles away from her family and her support system. And, you know, that's very common in abusive situations. Many times the abuser will isolate the person they're abusing from their support system so that they're the only one that the person then has to depend on. One of my earliest memories was of Jim removing the squeaky part of a toy shark I loved. It was distracting his TV time, and nothing was allowed to interfere with that. I was not allowed to get in front of the TV or make noise while he was watching it. I learned from a very young age to tiptoe around him, and that he was to be feared. Another very early memory I have is of him leaving my bedroom one night, me laying there with my panties around my ankles. I needed to use the bathroom, and I remember him standing in the doorway so angry because I would not hurry up. Once I was able to go, he had put me into bed, and the next thing I remember was laying there with him pulled down. I don't know if the sexual abuse had started then, but I do know I was very afraid of him. I cannot remember a time when I did not equate him with fear. Fear was always a constant companion of mine for as far back as I can remember. I was afraid of him, of the dark, of being alone in a room, the bathroom, and many other things. I was terrified of my closet because I always felt like something was in there hiding and just waiting to come and get me when the lights were off. For as long as I can remember, I had a feeling of being watched by something evil all the time, and I could never escape it. I felt eyes on me constantly, and I never felt safe. There was no place for me to hide. I can never remember feeling secure and safe to the point of me being able to fully relax. It was like having someone right on my heels no matter where I went or what I was doing. My stomach was always in a knot, and anxiety was always right under the surface, ready to boil over. When I was around 3, my mom divorced Jim and returned to Indiana with her family, and he stayed in Florida where his parents lived. He was granted visitation rights for me to spend 3 months every summer and every other Christmas with him in Florida. After my mom left him, he tried to get her back, and when that didn't work, he became very angry and threatened her life. At one point, he said that God had lied to him because he told him my mom would come back to him. When she didn't, he showed up at my grandparents' house, my mom's parents, and stood in the driveway screaming at God. He told God that he hated him and that he was a liar. He was screaming up at the sky and flew into a rage. He finally calmed down and left my grandparents' house. It took him a while, but he eventually moved on and began seeing other women when he finally realized it was over and she wasn't coming back. I have no idea how long it took him to move on, but I know eventually he did. And he never was alone in his life for very long. He always had a new woman. Like as soon as a relationship would end, he was in a new relationship for a lot of his life. Not his later years, but his earlier years that I can remember. So I'm going to read one more section, and then I'm going to stop for the day and pick back up next time. So I'm going to, this one was, the title was Introduction to the Occult. When I was around 7 years old, Jim remarried. She was a woman who had 3 children of her own, 2 daughters and a son. They were all 3 older than me. The first summer I visited them, I became quick friends with her youngest daughter because we were the closest in age. I can still remember the Pound Puppy sheet set we had on our beds. I loved those puppies. And I also had a Pound Puppy stuffed animal. So cute. I can also remember laying in bed and crying because I wanted to go home. I did not want to be there, and I missed my mom and the rest of my family. I was with a new family and a mean, abusive dad that I could not trust. I never wanted to go for visits, but I knew I was expected to go, and there was no way I could tell anyone that I did not want to go. I dreaded the summers I had to spend in Florida with him, but yet I did everything I could to bury my feelings. I was never allowed to fully express how I felt, so I learned from a very young age how to bury my feelings, but they seemed to seep out in other areas. I would at times act out in ways that left my mom and grandma stumped as to why I was behaving that way. One time I took a pen and marked up the faces of several of my favorite Barbies. Looking back, I think it was a cry for help, a lashing out of my anger, and also destroying my most prized possessions as a way to self-harm. Back then, I did not know how to physically hurt myself, so my go-to was destroying my favorite toys. I had a Hawaiian Barbie, and she was so pretty. I loved her so much. She was one of the many that I marked on their faces. I can remember sitting on the stair steps that led to our bedrooms at my grandma's house and crying. I felt sick inside for what I had done to her pretty little face. It tore me up and I tried to remove it, but it wouldn't come off. It was a constant reminder of what I did to her. She looked like on the outside what I was feeling on the inside. I felt marked, marred, damaged, and ugly. That was probably the start of self-harming behaviors and my lashing out. If it started before that, I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of my childhood. A lot of it is still gone. And I've given that completely and totally to the Lord. And I've told him, for a long time, I wanted all of my memories back. And I felt like I had been robbed because I didn't have a lot of memories. And I just wanted them all back. But walking through the process of like deliverance and healing and freedom and surrender, I've laid those at the feet of the Lord. And I've told him numerous times, his will be done. If he wants me to remember, then I will remember and I will walk through that. And if he doesn't, then I will trust him that I don't need to remember. But I just have huge, huge blocks in my memories as a child, as a teenager, and as a young adult. There's just a lot of time that's still missing. The sexual abuse was always present during the visits to Florida. Jim had a bathroom in his bedroom, and I can remember having to take a shower in there on certain nights. I dreaded my turn because I knew what that meant. It was also the birth of obsessive compulsive disorder. As I was put into this bed, I can remember staring at the ceiling and counting the tiles in the ceiling. I would lie there and count them over and over to silence what was happening to my body and to silence the thoughts whirling in my mind. That became my go-to blocking mechanism for many years afterward. It was the second bondage that formed in my life. The first was fear. So I think that was one of the big reasons why I have huge blocks in my memory, because the OCD and counting, I did up until I walked through deliverance in 2020. And it was my go-to like coping mechanism. So I would count over and over and over. But what it was actually doing was suppressing emotions, suppressing feelings, suppressing memories. It was during that same time frame that Jim also became involved in deep occult practices, which made him even more evil. He would tell me that he could read my mind, and if I ever told about the abuse, he would kill my mom and hurt me. It was so ingrained in my head that it caused me to really believe him. I can remember lying in my bed telling myself not to even think about the abuse or bad thoughts about him because he would know. That opened the door right up for repressed memories and emotions. Between the constant counting, refusing to let myself think about him, the trauma itself, and fear, my memories faded pretty quickly. I learned how to shut down completely and go through the motions like everything was fine. When asked, I said I loved Jim because that was what was expected. I would have never, ever disclosed the abuse because I had no doubt that he could and would hurt my mom and me. It was like living as a shell of a person. I went through the motions, but on the inside, I had the switch turned off on my emotions and feelings. I was never allowed to fully express who I was, my opinion, or my feelings out of fear of Jim. Even when he was not physically around, he still controlled me, my thoughts, and my actions. I was never free, and there was nowhere that I was safe. I had nowhere to hide and no one that I could share my pain with. I felt alone, abandoned, and isolated from a very young age. Even when I was back in Indiana, I would be very careful of the words I said and the thoughts I had because I really believed he could read my mind. I knew he was into occult practices because I saw some of the rituals myself, and I thought it gave him psychic powers because of the things he said to me. He often told me he could read my mind and that he had supernatural powers, and I fully believed him. I remember just feeling like I had eyes on me all the time, like that there was people or something watching me all the time. And I also remember never fully allowing myself to think about anything negative about my biological dad because I fully believed he could read my mind. There were years as a small child that I thought he knew every single thing I was thinking and feeling and saying and doing. During the time he was involved in the occult, he spent a lot of time making jewelry out of crystals because he said they gave him special powers and that he could tell the future. He also claimed to have the power to heal others, and he said if you looked into his eyes, you would see stars. He was very drawn to the occult because it offered him what he considered power. He was a very selfish and controlling person before the occult, and it just got worse and worse. He began to get deeper and deeper into thinking he had special powers and that he was going to play a part in the end times. He said he was praying for the end times, but not in the same way a preacher would pray for the end of time. At one point, he claimed to be a high priest in a satanic cult, and he bragged that the only way to be able to obtain that status was by the shedding of innocent blood. There were many dark things I was exposed to that created terror in my life, then and for many years to come. He made it clear that part of being his daughter meant that I belonged to him. My body was his to do with whatever he wanted with, and I was just one of his possessions. He said he had special supernatural abilities, and because I was his biological daughter, his blood flowed through me, and I had them as well. I was encouraged to try to tell the future and to practice using psychic abilities. That scared me because I did not want to have any type of connection to him, and I never wanted to be part of the occult practices he participated in. He was grooming me for the occult by making me participate in rituals and speaking demonic agreements over my life. One time, my stepsister at the time fell while we were outside roller skating on the road. I heard Jim and his wife say it looked like she broke her nose. They took her into the bedroom and shut the door. When she came out, he said he had healed her. I cannot remember if her nose was still swollen or not, but I do know that he really believed he had power and that he did not take her to the doctor. I have no idea what he did to her, but I just remember them going into the room and shutting the door. I knew better than to ask any questions. I also knew what happened when I was in that same bedroom with the door closed, and I did not want to have anything to do with what was going on in there. For years, I had dreams of being placed in a coffin with something or someone dead and their skin touching mine. The skin was so cold, dead, and stiff. It left me with a phobia of dead things that followed me through adulthood. Even as a small child, when I was staying with my maternal grandparents, I can remember trying to fall asleep in my grandma's bed and thinking that I did not want to wake up and find her dead and her skin touching mine. At times, it was like an obsession that would not leave my mind, and it kept me awake at night. When I stayed at my maternal grandparents' house, I often slept in bed with her, and my grandfather would go to a different bed because it was the only way I could get any sleep because the fear was so strong at nighttime and I could hardly ever sleep alone. Looking back, it was never a fear that she would die, not that I did not love her or wanted her to, and I wanted her to live, but it was overwhelming fear that she would die and I would wake up with her skin touching mine. I also could not sleep on my back because in my mind that was how dead bodies were laid. I also could not go anywhere near dead animals even as an adult. Going into a local museum that had a mummy was very difficult. I would basically run past the enclosure to get as far away from it as possible. It went to the extreme levels and I knew it was not normal, but I had no idea how to get rid of it, make it better, or change it. Oh my goodness. So I had a massive, massive phobia of dead things. Anything. Like I remember there would be a dead frog in my driveway and it would about send me into a massive panic attack because I could not stand being near anything dead. Yeah. So I am going to stop there. I just wanted to read a little bit. I may blog a little bit about this too. I don't know. I have no idea. I just wanted to read through it again and just see anything that the Lord brings me to or anything that he brings to memory. I know that I've had deeper levels of healing since I wrote this. I've had deeper levels of lessons. Oh my goodness, the things that he has taught me since 2022 when I wrote this. That could be an entire other book. It probably should be another book. But I'll see where he goes with this. I may or may not finish it. If we do, we will keep going right along. If not, yeah. Love you all. Be blessed.